ML Sports Take brought to you by Stanley Law Offices and Welch and Company Jewelers. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. One hot topic right now in college basketball is the opt-out by teams of the NIT, whether they got snubbed from the NCAA, they weren't good enough to make the NCAA. There's been really a lot of heat with this lately, I think, from fan bases. Some people feel that teams should play no matter what. You should do it for to grow your team, to get your logo and your brand out there, blah, 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 blah. Other people say, who cares? It's NIT. It stands for non-important tournament, which, by the way, is so sad because if you know the history of the NIT, going back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was at times easily the better tournament than the NCAAs. In fact, a lot of programs, coaches, etc., players, they chose to play in the NIT. If you didn't make the NCAAs and you made the NIT, it was no sort of like, oh no, kind of. It was a great tournament. I mean, it really was. But what it's become now, and now you add the portal and NIL and everything, it's just become this glorified exhibition. The ending is pretty amazing for a lot of programs because it's New York City and it's Madison Square Garden. But that's about it. And that's where I'm going to start. I think for certain programs, and this is no disrespect to them, not being a Duke, Kentucky, Kansas, North Carolina, a blue blood, or a program like a Louisville or Syracuse with history and winning a championship, or a Virginia, or, Gonzaga, those kind of programs. Not saying it that way. Or historical teams that have won recently and won in the past, like at Villanova, for example. I'm not saying it to demean any programs. There's no disrespect whatsoever. But I think for certain programs, Drake, St. Bonaventure, Indiana State, Richmond, Boston College in the ACC, right? You could, DePaul, for example. I could go on and on and on with the 351 division programs about why probably at least 150 to 200 should always play in the NIT. Branding, get your logo out there, right? Extra games no matter what. There's just a lot out there, and it benefits you to play, right? Because you always have to keep your program out there. And if you get hot, the end game is New York City. And I still think that there is every possible thing that you could ever imagine with value and ROI to play in Madison Square Garden. I don't care what it is. Regular season game, NIT, NCAA tournament, Big East tournament. I do not care. And by the way, I've always thought that they should do a New York State Apple Cup. Kind of call it like that, or maybe the Big Apple Cup. But, well, Big Apple sounds more New York City, but Apple, being more of the state and all the rest. I've always thought they should do an Apple Cup tournament, even at the beginning of the year. And you have St. John's, you have maybe a Manhattan, you've got Iona, you have Bonaventure, Siena, and Albany, Syracuse, UB, Niagara, Canisius. I mean, how cool would that be, Binghamton, to have an Apple Cup with all the New York State schools in like a 16-team sort of tournament, win and go home at the Garden at the end, right? You start on the home bases, you play your openers, and then you go to another venue, maybe like a MVP Arena in Albany, you go to Key Bank in Buffalo, whatever the case may be. You go to the bigger venue, and then you go to the real big venue in terms of the Garden. I always think there's value because it's New York City, it's the Garden, it's ESPN games and all the rest. That end game is still super big to me in terms of recruiting. And a lot of these schools, no matter who you have leaving, the players are the players. I would say just go play, because no matter who you have on your team next year, it's more about your brand, your label, your logo, your program overall, money, recognition, and if there's a chance you go on a run, you end up in New York City. Those programs are in that particular category. Everybody else, Syracuse, Duke, North Carolina, and I'm not lumping Syracuse with those programs overall. I'm just listing the bigger Power Fives, right? The Tennessees, the Auburns, the Oregons, all these other programs, even a Gonzaga at this point. I mean, a bunch of them, where, you know, a St. John's, a Villanova, a Connecticut, certainly under Dan Hurley right now. You don't have to worry about the NIT if you're Dan Hurley in Connecticut, for God's sakes. They're going to have a real good chance to repeat here. But all these programs with these lofty expectations, where the standard is you got to make the tournament every single year. Syracuse, for example, their standard, make the tournament every year. Every 2-3 years, you make the Sweet 16. Every 7, 8, 9 years, you want to make the Final Four. Duke's standard pretty much is Sweet 16 every year, Final Four every other year, right? A national championship every couple years, and then that might even still be a little low for some psychos. I mean, it's on an Alabama football kind of thing here. Same for Kentucky, Kansas, Carolina. You know, you can go on and on and on. Look at the standard by a Baylor now. You look at a standard by, you know, Gonzaga now. You look at all these other schools. For those programs, Louisville's in the basement right now. They would be included in here as well. And NC State, I know what they're doing this year, but in normal cases, right? I can go on and on and on. You get the picture. For those programs, the NIT, and I say that because you don't know who's going to be in your program next year, so you can't necessarily grow it, and you don't have another reason to grow it, right? How is a Power 5 that's already out there getting piles of money, millions and millions and millions of dollars? They're already out there with the brand. Michigan State, for example. Do you think Michigan State needs to brand more, going back to Magic Johnson? Bonaventure, Drake, Indiana State, all the teams in the Horizon, all the teams in the Missouri Valley, the UB, Akron Zips, those kind of programs, man, they need a lot of brand. You can never have enough branding. Michigan State, North Carolina, you don't need help with the brand, and you certainly have money already coming through as well. What I'm getting at is, if you have a bad year and you're one of those programs, the idea with media, fans, and others, players, coaches, let's build for next year. That's the immediate thinking. Let's build for next year with our players. So we'll play the NIT, extra practices, all the extra reps in the games, and oops, you can't do that because you can't build for next year because you don't know who's going to be on the roster. With the other programs, you don't know who's going to be on the roster, but you have the other things that you can still benefit from. The branding, possible revenue, all the other things, the end game being in New York City. Of course, I think that's a benefit for every program in America, all 351. That's where I think the difference is. You take a Michigan State versus a Bonaventure. Michigan State doesn't need any help in revenue, brand, all that stuff. The only thing they're looking to do if they have a down year, which is rare, is let's build for next year. You can't build for next year because you don't have any players. Okay, opt out. St. John's this year, high standards, even raised higher this year with Rick Pitino. Their standard is NCAA. They don't know who's going to be on the roster. It was already a wild roster going into this year to begin with. Rick Pitino says, no thanks. I don't blame him. He doesn't know who's going to be on the roster next year. Ba-boom. St. John's already plays in the Garden. St. John's already plays in arguably the best conference in America in the Big East, which, by the way, I thought they got hosed on bids. I thought Seton Hall, St. John's should have been in. You know, I don't care about all the analytics. I don't care about, you know, negative resume, whatever else. I saw them both play. I saw them both play all year. Saw them play in the tournament. They have both passed the look test. Their resume looked good. The conference was a beast. I would have put both of them in. I don't care if DePaul and Georgetown were at the basement. I don't care because there's always two shit teams at the bottom of every conference in college basketball. That's just how it goes. And in some cases, there's 4 or 5, and they still send 5 or 6 teams to the tournament. So that's a piss poor excuse if you're using DePaul and Georgetown, bringing them down. Give me a break. But you St. John's, I mean, they would probably have more to benefit from playing in the NIT than like a Syracuse because of the state of the program, or a Michigan State because of the state of the program, but they don't have as much to play for in the NIT like a Abana does, right? Because they already play in the Garden, and they probably make significantly more money in their basketball department with the Fox television deal and all the other things going on. So they are already benefiting, even not playing in the NIT. They don't need as much of the branding. They are New York City's team. There's no question, although you could argue some other teams like UConn, maybe Syracuse, Duke, whatever. But St. John's, they're linked to the Garden. They're linked to New York City forever, going back to the original Big East days. I think that's the big separator. For a lot of you out there saying, well, you should play in the NIT no matter what. Not if you're Michigan State and you don't know who's coming back and you have nothing to gain from it other than if you can guarantee me a spot in the Final Four in Madison Square Garden, which, by the way, do you think a lot of players are going to be motivated? That's another issue. Frankly, we saw Bonaventure not motivated in 15-16 when they missed, and I didn't blame them. Who'd they lose to? Wagner that year in the RC? I think there's a big difference between the example set here by Michigan State, excuse me, I talk too much, and then the Bonaventure situation with always looking at brand, money, logo, alumni, getting to the Garden. There are so many things that benefit. Now you look at it, you go, well, what if Bonaventure made the NIT? You don't have Barry Evans, you don't have Luke. Who cares? Play whoever's on the roster. Seriously, play whoever's there. You still go to the NIT. You get a little TV exposure, and there's a chance that some of those players will be back, so you're going to work that into the picture, plus the branding, plus all the things, maybe catching, lightning in the bottle, and you get to the Garden eventually. Whatever the case may be, I think that's the separator, because you can always improve your brand, your bank account, recruiting, being in front of more eyeballs, more TV games, and for the chance that those players on the roster, they can get the reps in games for next year if you definitely know they're going to come back. And there are those players in those Michigan State cases and others, of course, too. But again, the big separator is that they don't need the extras like the other programs like Bona does. And I just think that's the big thing in terms of playing or not playing in the NIT. And by the way, you got to get asked in the first place. Mike Lindsley here with you, an ML Sports Take brought to you by Barks and Rec Doggy Daycare, Ken's Auto Detailing, and our great friends at Stumbling Monkey Brewing Company. If you're in and around the great city of Rochester, right there in Victor School Street, they've got the Amber Ale, the Red Ale, the unbelievable sours and seltzer, that should be the last one. And IPAs on tap. Make sure you join the Mug Club as well. Grab your growlers and your crowlers, and they've got awesome hats and hoodies as well. StumblingMonkeyBeer.com is the website before your visit. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. And as I always tell you, enjoy the games.